Today we're going to be doing some basic kart maintenance, such as changing your oil, a clutch change, chain tensioning, and a sprocket changeout. Quick note, this is a nitro lefty. So what that means is that the engine is on the correct side.
Incorrect.
Depending on who you talk to, not Alec. And then for those of you, most of you, it's going to be traditional, right? If you're looking at it from the front, it's on the left. If you're in the driver's seat, it's on the right. So what that means is that everything's inboard. Makes it just a little bit more difficult to get to the clutch over there, right? The sprocket back here, which then has to use a split sprocket. There's your split right there. Split right there. Whereas the lefty can get away with a solid sprocket, which makes things a lot easier. But for all intents and purposes, they're the same. This one we can film a lot easier, so that's what we're gonna do. Changing your oil. Step one, you need to warm the engine.
Don't worry, I got it.
No, not like that.
Okay.
Not like that. Okay.
So start by removing the fill plug, which just twists off. This will be pretty much the same for a 206 or a clone or a ghost or a 225 as this is. I pull that out because, hey, look, it's right at the top. Now that you've removed the fill plug, take your 10 millimeter or whatever size it may be.
This isn't my garage.
And break the drain plug loose. Oh, this could be a mess. And fair warning to everyone, as you can see, this is just going to make a mess when you drain it. Be aware of that. Make sure you have a big enough catch can. You don't want oil going everywhere when you do it. Okay, and now that it's started just dripping, I'd say we're close enough. So reinstall your drain plug, wipe it off, clean it up, whatever you want to do. Make sure the gasket's still on it. Make sure to start it by hand. Don't want to cross-thread anything. Get it all the way in there. There you go. Grab your 10 millimeter, 11, whatever you got to use for your drain plug, and just start tightening it down. Do not use an impact gun on this. 9 times out of 10, these go into aluminum. They strip easy. You want it snug, definitely don't want it to come out, or then you're buying an engine. There you go. Now that we got the oil drained, get your rag and start wiping everything down. Look at that, first time this has ever been cleaned. Now that the drain plug's tight, grab your oil, grab your funnel, get your funnel down in the fill hole, and start to fill. Now most 4-cycle carts take anywhere between 14 and 17 ounces of oil. Please check your manufacturer recommendations for how much it takes. Manufacturers also make karting specific oil. So it's recommended not to use car oil or regular oil for this application. Use karting specific oil.
To service the clutch and sprocket, you have to loosen the engine mount bolts underneath the cart in order to loosen the chain and release the chain from the clutch and or sprocket.
The next step after loosening the motor mount is to back off the chain adjuster, which usually has a jam nut on one side and then threads into a housing on the other. You don't need to back it off a bunch, just enough to shift the engine to remove the chain.
Once you have the motor mounts loose, the chain should now be loose. Remove the chain from either the clutch or sprocket. It does not matter which one is first.
Removing a sprocket is a straightforward process. It requires removing 6 bolts with either hand tools or electric tools. Remove the 6 bolts, pull off the sprocket, and install the new one. For more traditional go-karts, not this lefty, you'll be using a split sprocket like this. Bolt it on, make sure the gap is tight on both sides, and then you can reinstall the chain.
To change a clutch, there's a couple ways. There's a specialized tool such as this, piston locker. This goes in place of the spark plug here. Pull the spark plug out, this gets threaded in. You then rotate the piston until it's top dead center, which this piston stopper will then, as the name suggests, stops the piston. You can then now use a hand tool to loosen it. The other option though is much more fun.
And easy.
And requires power tools. You just slap that bad boy on there and you're done.
And
Who's
then
picking
cut.
those up now? Great, great.
Made for good TV. Okay.
Once the bolt is removed, simply slide this out with an emphasis on carefully sliding, because if you can see, there is a keyway on the shaft of that. And what that means, if I can get this out, inside the clutch is also a key. No different than what sits on your axle and keeps all your sprockets and your brakes on that axle. So that key is very important. Do not lose that key. Now to put it back on is no different. If you notice, in this case, this was put on with the sprocket inside closest to the motor. It can also be installed the other way, outboard. It depends on your setup. It also depends on the chassis. Sometimes they don't always work that way. To reinstall the clutch, you need to make sure that you're putting the washers in the correct orientation and order that they're supposed to go in. Simply hand thread it to start. Do not use a power tool to start this. You will strip the thread and then you'll be out another engine. Once you get it to a point where it's snug, you can either once again reuse the piston stop tool or
line it up and let it go. And there you go.
Under a more typical kart setup, the chain will more than likely be hanging off the axle when performing any one of these tasks. In order to reinstall this chain, one must connect it either to the clutch or the sprocket to start.
For ease of use, we'll use the clutch first, and then, with the motor back and the chain incredibly loose, line it up on the sprocket, spin it around, and the chain is on. Now we tension. But first, a very important note when doing any chain, sprocket, clutch work at all, do not stick your finger in here and spin it. That is how injuries happen. Keep your hands, keep all 10 digits away. Now we'll tighten it.
Chain tension can be adjusted via the engine. The engine can be moved forward, so that it is tight, backwards, so it is loose. In order to get a more finite change and adjustment within the chain tension, one can also use the engine mount stop. So what we are going to do, in this case, we're going to wiggle this back. So we have it loose, right? And while it's loose, we're also going to adjust, and it does take some adjustment, a little bit of troubleshooting to find that sweet spot. Now the engine stop tool certainly helps in adjusting this forward and backward in a much smaller increments than if you were to try and do this with just moving the engine block by hand. Once you've reached a chain tension that you find to be appropriate, don't forget that by just tightening the motor mounts underneath will also adjust chain tension as well.